Welcome, Jared, to our first actual live Computer Vision Decoded episode. Let me just jump you in there. We are here post Apple keynote showing off the new iPhone 14, 14 Pro. Looks like they had a whole new watch and an upgraded AirPods. And so I thought this was a perfect opportunity for us to do another Computer Vision Decoded episode where we can talk about the iPhone upgrades and what they mean for computer vision and get your take on it, Jared. And also, I mean, we should be doing this for Samsung. We should be doing this for Google as well. But to be honest, most of the apps right now for photogrammetry and things are built on Apple. So it's kind of the most important app or platform currently. And I know they may be playing some catch up to what you see on Samsung. So like 48 megapixels. That's not new to the phones, but we'll talk about that today. So welcome, Jared. First off, Jared, I have a question for you. What is an iPhone your daily driver at home? Are you using an iPhone every day? Are you a fanboy?
I do not. I have an Android phone. It's a Samsung phone.
I'm excited to hear that because
I use a Windows PC
with
a Mac laptop on the side.
You can all see when I share my screen today, it is a Windows machine. I do have a Mac behind me for when I need it for lap traveling, but we are both not exactly Apple fanboys, but full transparency, I use an iPhone every day. I also use AirPods, and I'm in the ecosystem at home completely. But when it comes to actual engineering, it's not the most useful platform. So, but great for capturing. So, okay, so I'm going to share my screen. So if you're listening to this podcast, I do suggest tuning in to the live screen recording, which will be on our YouTube channel. So everything goes on the EveryPoint YouTube channel. So you can just search on YouTube for EveryPoint and find us, or just type in Computer Vision Decoded, and you will find this episode in the next day or so and have all the visuals. But just know we'll try to talk about what we're looking at, and the pictures basically just showing photos that I grabbed from the live keynote event on my Twitter account. Here I put it just as an easy way for us to kind of go through the stream. So again, yeah, you can also listen to this on all the major podcast players, but there's different ways to tune in. And this is a very visual based podcast, I'd say. So let's just jump into this, Jared. First off was the watch. I'm just going to really kind of gloss over the non-camera specific hardware, but I just noticed that they spent a lot of time talking about safety and features for health, and I thought that was kind of an interesting ad. You can go watch this keynote if you want the replay, but was there any features? I don't know, Jared, did you watch the whole thing through? Is there anything that excited you about the watch that, I don't know, that would excite you? I always felt like it'd be it's just an easy way to trigger images, things like that remotely, but I don't know if that really crosses over into computer vision at all.
Yeah, not a lot of computer vision. I mean, what excited me just to sort of in general is just, being in computer vision where the camera is the main sensor that I leverage. I like just sensors in general. And so one of the things they talked about was, okay, the better, crash detection. So in order to support that, they had the upgraded gyroscope in there. It sounded like I had like a faster sampling time, as well as putting in the high acceleration, like the high G-force accelerometer to detect those Stronger magnitude accelerations. So from that, I mean, am I going to use that in computer vision application? Not necessarily, but I like this notion though of embedding additional sensors in these devices so that they have a better better knowledge about their environment. Because you can imagine as we start, marching toward more and more augmented reality applications, having all these different peripherals with their own sensors and their own understanding of the environment around them is just going to make the entire experience better.
Yeah, definitely. I see the fall detection. That's something that I actually really like for I got my mom a watch recently, or my family, my brother actually did for my mom, and we like the fall detection. She's not that elderly that it's a big hazard, but I mean, I'm still in my late 30s and falling hurts way more than it did in my 20s. So, just things like that. I like all the accelerometers they've added in there. I could imagine one day perhaps if you had a watch and an iPhone, they could work in tandem to refine your AR kit motion. I mean, can you imagine if you had them on the same hand holding the phone and like here we go, there you got your watch. Oh yep, see there on my fanboy. Got my watch, I got my phone. You could use each other's accelerometer, or perhaps the new one has a better accelerometer. You have an older iPhone. Can you imagine you could somehow detect that?
Hmm.
It'd be interesting. Way to
Yeah.
go. And then for the sake of it, what was your favorite watch band? Are you an Hermes kind of guy? Or are you more of a Nike watch band? Uh,
Yeah.
Nike watch band.
Yeah. I like
Uh,
those. Yeah. Those sporty looks look cool.
I do like the fact that an Hermes watch band costs as much as an iPhone. So that's something that's interesting. All right. So yeah, moving on. They also had the Ultra, which I thought that was very interesting addition for me. I'm a former outdoor athlete. I still do some running, but more in a city. Um, but I have aspirations when my kids get a little older, of getting back out there running off in the wilderness and getting beyond the GPS, or sorry, not GPS, beyond the cell phone reception. I do like that
Hmm.
safety component. So I thought that was an interesting addition as well, um, to the watch lineup. Just the new GPS, the new band, this L1 plus L5 GPS.
Hmm.
Um, did you, maybe I missed this? Do you know if that was added in the iPhone 12 or 14 Pro? I'm saying 12.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Um, Again, I think that would be something interesting because the GPS on an iPhone is not the best.
Hmm.
It's not survey grade by any means, uh, but not that we're using GPS data to really mark where your photos were taken to do a better 3D reconstruction, perhaps. But I think it would just be interesting to place perhaps your images of a scan of something using 3D, like photogrammetry to better place that on the Earth post scan.
Yeah.
So that excited me when I saw that they made improvements to GPS, and I'll have to check. Maybe that made it in the iPhone. So on my screen here, I'm just showing the newest Ultra watch as well. Yeah, so lots of improvements for outdoor athletes. Brighter screen. That's something
Hmm.
I always like, which we'll get into with the iPhone. So glossing the AirPods. Do you own a pair of AirPods, Jared?
I do not.
Yeah. Once you get a pair, you can't go back. But if you don't have an iPhone, it makes absolutely no sense. So, but again, I like this. They had an H2 chip, improved connectivity with your iPhone. So I just seen more and more of these chips being placed in all sorts of peripherals they have. Um, Better tracking. So now you can track your AirPods. If I bring up the right picture of that, it'll track your AirPods to their exact location. Now, matter of fact, lost an AirPod this week. Took 2 days to find it, and it was lo and behold in the room I'm in every day. Just kind of like fell behind my bedstand. I just never spotted it. Um, but I know that this functionality is leading towards perhaps some sort of VR, AR kind of thing where if you can track where everything is to a very high precision, you can have a better immersive experience. So,
Yeah, and this is and what's cool here is because it's Apple in the Apple ecosystem that they're sort of control that whole hardware and software lineup. They're able to do things in hardware that you couldn't do in software. So, for instance, here
mm-hmm.
like using I forget what it's like, but yeah, like the U1 chip, which can communicate a high frequency between two devices and figure out very accurately what the relative pose or positioning is between those two devices. And so a lot of times, I think in computer vision, when I'm computing the pose or position of a camera, I'm doing it through purely visual means. So I'm capturing that image and I'm using software to figure out, well, hey, how is my camera related to my scene based on this, the software processing of that image. Whereas here, when you have a hardware chip that can do some of that for you, essentially for free, that's a really an amazing tool to have in your toolbox. When you're Apple and you can do things in hardware or software, or whatever makes sense.
I didn't mean to put this on the screen yet, but Volker's is boring, no Apple reality. But yeah, seeing all those hardware things, I think, they're doing some interesting things there, connecting the hardware together. Computer vision, I have to track where I left my things with the camera. I don't, all kinds of things. Just having that smart talking, it will be interesting where this all leads. And I know these chips aren't cheap. I'm guessing that they spent some money on these, so they're not just putting that in for a small feature. I'm assuming. All right, so let's get into where I probably, if anyone's going to tune into, it was about the iPhones, and I'm just going to start with the base iPhone, which, I mean, if we're kidding ourselves, it's not even a base anymore. This is a pretty full featured iPhone. They have the SE as well, but before we get into the iPhone, I just wanted to point out that this room was gigantic, so obviously they were doing some interesting LED screen backgrounds or something. So the production value of this was quite amazing. They had a zoomed out picture of her, and I was like, oh my goodness, how big of a room did they have for this filming? Which is crazy. They can make it look like she's that in the actual room, but we all know they probably hid some seam line. I can see by mouse here, some seam line right here where like the actual floor turned into a digital projection, and that was pretty cool. Oh my gosh, we have Angels. We have we have someone who joined in who knows a thing or two about tech as well. So looks like a few people are joining in. So what excited you about the iPhone 14, if anything? I know you're anything here you saw make you want to switch from your Android to an iPhone?
Nothing specifically in this presentation. I mean, I use an iPhone for software development, when we're testing the latest, on-device reconstruction capabilities or, computer vision applications. But yeah, nothing here. I mean, things intrigued me, but nothing was like, okay, I got to immediately switch today.
Yeah. And if we should point out the fact that it's not that you don't have an iPhone to use. We get you an iPhone at work to develop on. Yep. You could easily just use that. It's an unlocked version. Yet you choose to continuously use a 2-year-old iPhone or Android. So, Yep. All right, so. And it's obvious that I would get a black, but I do like the. I don't understand why there's more colors for the iPhone 14 than the new version, but yeah. So here's a few different things about the stats here that they showed up. Again, you have HDR images, a lot of good color, bright screen. I think we can talk about the bigger screen, but why would I care about a bright screen, Jared?
Well, bright screen is if you're outside trying to capture imagery and make sure that what you've captured looks good and meets what you need.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like it's essential when you're outside to be able to see what the heck you're doing. I have a what do you call it? A camera monitor for my like high-end film camera, and I think it brightens out to 800 nits, and then I have to put a sun shield on top just so I can see the thing outside. And I feel like that's silly. I should just got a brighter one. But let's see here. Here we go. It says it's weird that Apple can use to do these kind of produce videos while having press and analysts in person. We could also talk that for a minute. They invited everyone, yet they still managed to do this like epic film release. It's like the most expensive infomercial of the year that happens. I think that is silly. Do we think they're going to go back to the main stage that they've built right before they had COVID to use? We'll see. And someone else said, since again, this is going to be a podcast later, but since we did a live stream, we do have people asking questions or chiming in. wait until next release day for Apple Reality smart glasses. Um, yeah, I hope we get a release in October or something before the end of the year. I still don't know if it's happening this year, but we'll see. All right, so switching back to the iPhone, I noticed that they have these A15 Bionic that added another core, so they went from 4 to 5 core processing, just makes it faster, snappier. But they always have a dedicated image signal processor. Jared, why would they do that?
Because when you take take photos, you got to do something with all that pixel data. How to
Yeah,
make sense of it and make those photos look good.
let me get
So yeah,
back
you're
to
always
my.
on your chip. You're always going to have all different kinds of processing. You have like your CPU, the GPU, the neural engine, and then that image processor, image signal processor. And so each of
Yeah,
those, that's specialized algorithms written in hardware, or at least hardware that's tailored toward those different applications, whether it's the graphics or the image, or whether you're doing some machine learning.
yeah,
But yeah.
yeah. Someone pointed out it says weird that the 14 gets last year's processor, while this
Yeah.
year gets the new processor. But I will point out, if I bring up the Apple website, they did something different because it says A15. We need to probably bump this up. It says A15 Bionic with 5 core GPU versus an A15 Bionic chip with 4 core GPU. So
Oh, interesting.
they stuffed another core in there, but I mean, it's essentially last year's processor. It's kind of like an upgrade. So as I think of like the NVIDIA RTX graphics card in my PC, they do like I have like there's like a 3080 then a 3080 Ti where they just bump the specs, but
Yeah.
it's essentially the same. So it looks like they did a bump there. Um, but so okay, so they talked about cameras. This is why I thought you would be really good to have on here as well. It says how okay. So I want to ask one more question while we're on here. How many of the camera sensors are 48 megapixels? Or are they still 12 megapixels? We'll get to that, Martin. That's a good question. Just know on the 14, the non-pro, there's no 48 megapixels. You got to upgrade to the pro version. They always hold out that. And I was really hoping that they'd add lidar to this camera, but they didn't. Um, just because that would be intriguing. But can you break down? So for anyone who's never been on a Computer Vision Decoded episode or listened to one, he's a actual PhD computer vision expert in 3D reconstruction. He's grinning there, or I don't know, smirking. But he knows a lot about cameras. He knows a lot about 3D reconstruction. He doesn't know everything about computer vision because it's pretty broad. Like so much about, it's like a doctor of other things. They only know so much in their field, and he specialized in 3D. But when it comes to main cameras, it's this larger sensor. So for people who are not camera people, why do I care about the sensor size?
Yeah, so sensor size. So the process of capturing a photo, it's all about capturing light, and so when I want to take that photo, the more light that I'm able to capture, the higher quality that photo is going to be. So if I have a really, really, really tiny image sensor, there's a very small amount of light that's going to come in and actually hit that sensor, which then means my photo might have some more noise in it. It's going to the overall quality is not going to be as good compared to a much larger sensor physically. There's more light, there's more photons, individual photons hitting that sensor, and so it's able to get a better representation of what it is that it's looking at. So you can think about in environments where you have really bright things and really dark things. You have shadows as well as like the sunlight. Being able to capture more lights can give you a better overall representation. But where it really, really pays off is in low light environments. So you think like if you're indoors, you have some dim lighting. There's not a lot of light in the scene to begin with, and so you want to have that larger sensor with those larger pixels. To capture all of that available light, or as much of that light as you can, to give that nice sort of noise-free image.
All right. So then we have this next. I just kept on my screen. So again, if you're on the podcast, I have a picture of the 12 megapixel main camera from the iPhone with some stats. It says first stats larger sensor. Really not a stat, but a fact, I guess. Then it says 1.9. What does that mean? Micrometers. See, I'm not. That's in a measure I'm not used to using. Micrometer pixels. So that's like the pixel pitch. Again, that's something that. Can you explain like what? Why do I care about the size of a pixel? What does that translate to? Someone taking photos or wanting to capture something?
Yeah, so that's similar. It ties sort of hand in hand with that larger sensor. So what Apple's saying here is they've kept the resolution the same. So there's still 12 megapixels, so 12 million pixels that make up that sensor. It's just that the overall sensor has gotten bigger, so the overall pixels that make up that sensor have also gotten bigger. And so now they're saying it's 1.9 microns per pixel, meaning that each pixel can then capture more light compared to a sensor that was only 1.7 microns or 1.5 microns, things like that.
Okay. And then the aperture is like when you look at a fixed camera, right? You can see fixed focal length. That's what we're seeing here, fixed focal length. And then there's some that has variable focal length. This is fixed, correct? With a
This is no that's the so the aperture. So here that with the f number, yeah. Sometimes f in computer vision refers to focal length. In this
okay.
case, they're talking about the aperture, which is the size of the opening. Or the effective size of the opening at the front of that lens. So this also controls how much light enters that sensor. So in here,
Okay.
smaller numbers let in more light. And so it's nice to see, whenever a new phone comes out, to see that F number, that F in this case, f1.5. The lower that number is, the more light it's able to pass through the lens to hit the sensor, and so you get that higher quality photo.
Gotcha. Okay. So you were looking for low. Is there like a theoretical limit? Is one the lowest it can go, or is that something you know about?
I don't know if there's a theoretical limit. I think some lens manufacturers have gone lower. For some reason, I think like Canon, or somebody, might have made like an f, 0.9 or an f 0.8 or something that's really low. But a lot of times, if you get to like f 1.2, that's a really wide lens.
Okay.
That's letting a lot through light. More
Okay.
typically, yeah, you might see an f 1.8. Um,
Yeah.
or something.
Yeah. Okay. And I'll even see F2 something.
Yeah.
So what's sensor shift OIS? Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah,
This
yeah.
is an Apple thing.
No, this is sort of this common camera technology. So this is saying it's sensor shift optical image stabilization. So that's the OIS, and so this is all about trying to give you more blur free imagery. So there's a few different ways you can try to stabilize the imagery. So you imagine you're holding your phone and you do your best to hold that phone still, but your hand, there's going to be some small shake, some small tremor, can be big shake, if you're,
Hmm.
moving vehicle or you're walking or whatever, but that phone's going to be moving around. And so there's a few different ways you can try to stabilize that footage. And sometimes you'll use a combination of ways. One way is to do it purely through software, digitally. And so in that technique, a lot of times what happens is when you're taking a photo or taking a video, the software will artificially crop that image or crop that video. So a lot of times you'll see this, especially with video. If I'm recording,
Hmm.
a video sequence, that video will be cropped, and the region of the video that's cropped will change from frame to frame to try to compensate for, oh, this frame the camera got bumped and was looking a little too high. Oh, in the next frame the camera was bumped and was looking a little too low. So
Yeah.
the crop region will change from frame to frame. So that's one way to do it through software, but that won't sort of improve. Like if you actually really bumped that camera, you'll see some motion blur. You can't. It can be hard to compensate for motion blur purely through software, and so that's where you then turn to hardware techniques. So in hardware, if you had a DSLR or some other mirrorless camera, where you actually have a physical lens that's attached to the camera body, sometimes you might see optical image stabilization done through the lens. And so there's
Hmm.
actually motors inside of the lens that are going to shift the lens elements up and down to bend the light in different ways to compensate for the motion. So if all of a sudden my hand shakes and the camera looks slightly down, well, then that lens element can shift in a different direction to then bend the light to have it then go back up, and so it compensates for that motion. What
Okay.
Apple's done here, and other camera manufacturers do this too, is instead of moving the lens elements, they're actually moving the sensor. So the lens stays fixed, but then that rectangular sensor that's capturing the light, that sensor can move up and down and left and right
Okay.
and move around to compensate. So as your hand shakes, that sensor can move really, really, really fast to try to make up for any motion that you do. So what that just gives you, both for your photos and your video, can give you much clearer, less blur,
Okay.
and just higher quality.
So this isn't a new addition actually to Apple.
No.
But I do remember was it I don't know if it was 2 years ago they added the, the optical image stabilization to the actual pro level phone. So I think it's kind of made its way down into the non-pro phone as well.
Yep.
So that's good to hear. I mean, uh, there's a huge difference when I'm walking around. I don't. This says main camera. I don't know if I got a capture of all the different cameras, but I do know like the ultra wide doesn't have it, or it feels always shakier. So
Mhm.
that might be also because they're kind of using the maximum of that ultra wide as well. So they also said 49% low light improvement. So that's I bet you a lot of that's that like bigger, the big aperture, the bigger sensor size, the all those things we just talked about kind of lead to exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Low light, and that's a very as the Apple goes, 49% low light improvement. Well, that's not like a metric. So is that just visually less noise in the low light improvement? Is that getting more detail? I don't know, but
Yeah.
we'll go with it.
Yeah.
Um,
And some of that may be, yeah, so both, so hopefully some of that, I think, yeah, would be from the hardware. So having that larger sensor is going to, definitely help you with that low light performance.
yeah.
So that's probably where a bunch of it's coming from. Um, I also heard, and maybe this is somewhere in your tweets, but I also heard Apple talking about the way they redid their
The photonic engine. Is that what we're
they,
going to go to?
yes, yes, the
Yes.
photonic engine. So changing around the order in which they do the processing steps for that imagery. So one of the things Apple was talking about was saying, well, hey, to enable that, their better HDR, just their better image quality, they can take a burst of photos at different exposure levels and then fuse those all together into a single result using their machine learning algorithms. And so what I heard Apple say was, well, previously they did that on the compressed images, so images that have already sort of been processed
Yeah.
using their image processing techniques. Whereas now they're running that on the uncompressed, sort of sounds like they're like the raw photos. And so that to me I'm excited about that. Because yeah, when you turn a lot of times to that raw data and do your machine learning or do analysis with that raw data, it helps to give you kind of better control over the entire process. Because otherwise, if I first am taking like 6 photos at different exposures and then processing them each independently, I may be introducing artifacts or different biases, there might into each of those photos. That then when I try to now do a single operation that combines all 6, now I'm trying to process already pre-processed data, and I may have lost things along the way. Whereas going back to that raw data source and saying, okay, here's all the raw data from those different exposures. Let's bring that together to
Yeah.
get that better result.
Yeah. Oh, well, so this kind of goes into someone who also commented on this live stream, um, Martin as well from AEC Magazine. I suggest if you like AEC, go into there. But anyways, they've gone a bit crazy with AI enhancements to images, a lot of in-camera processing.
Yep.
That's exactly what we're talking about.
Yep.
Part of that is my we all know is the camera on an iPhone. This is even a bigger one on my iPhone 13. Is a bigger lens we got here, but you can only get away with so much versus a mirrorless camera, DSLR. Where you got just bigger piece of glass, a bigger sensor. So you have to rely on computational photography, which is very much in that computer vision
Yep.
stack.
Yep.
Well, that's interesting. So they're getting better images. I bet you that 5-core processor, part of that, maybe that processing bump, um, is being able to do this faster. So, although it's last year's chip, and then again, someone just we also have here enhancements are unavoidable.
Yep.
One thing I always love is when people are saying what's a better camera, and they have like the Samsung versus iPhone versus Google Pixel Dual or whatever we see. It's almost like none of them are seeing the raw photo taken from the camera. It's like which AI did the best job and which AI do you like the best,
Yep.
because they
Yep.
can bias towards warm colors, sharper images, more natural, less natural. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Because yeah,
Yeah.
photography, it's such a subjective process, because it's you're not just like you just said there, it's like you could approach it as a pure sensor problem and say, oh, my goal is just to count the number of photons that hit this, rectangular region in space, but then no. Okay, not many humans care about that. I don't care about photon counts on a pixel. I want to see a nice looking image. And so that process of, well, how do you map those photon counts to actual a nice looking photo? That's where some of that subjective nature comes in.
Hmm.
And so even in, prior to these AI algorithms that are doing this processing, you had humans who were hand tuning all of the different, the mapping functions, saying, okay, well, hey, I have these, photon counts coming in. How am I going to do the tone mapping curves? How do I prioritize highlights and shadows? And so you have all these different things that go into sort of tuning the appearance of that final photo. So
Yeah.
what Apple's doing now is just saying, well, hey, we can train machine learning algorithms to do some of that better because we can adapt those tone mapping curves, we can adapt the dynamic contrast, we can adapt the appearance of the photo based on the content of it. So if I'm looking at clouds, if I'm looking at landscape, if I'm looking at a portrait, if I'm looking at indoors, we can have different sort of outputs or different mapping functions to alter the appearance of that photo based on the content that it contains.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. So there's a lot of people behind this making decisions that end up
Yeah.
what it looks like um, in the end here. Oh yeah. So see, everyone's competing on software. So who has the best set of engineers in the background doing exactly as you described?
Yep.
Um, yeah. It says here we go. Cameras have become far more computational software defined every generation, which is so
Yes.
true.
Yeah, because it's so easy to make advancements in that way. Altering camera hardware technology. Hardware is much more difficult to change because there's so much investment to actually build these physical sensors, test them, develop them, make them
Hmm.
smaller and smaller and smaller, fit even more pixels onto that sensor. That gets increasingly more difficult. Whereas alternatively, it's much easier to write software. Train better machine learning models that can make your photos, look nicer in various ways without needing that
Yeah.
raw hardware there.
Yeah. All right. Well, moving along to action mode. So action mode, as you were talking about, image stabilization.
Yep.
Optically, this I'm guessing is software. We're
Yep.
getting yeah, we're just cropping the image. Um, just like you see on a GoPro, you can get like stabilized versus destabilized uh, um, on all these action cams. My question is, when are people are just going to strap the newest iPhones to their helmets and no longer have to buy GoPros? This is a big stab at that whole um, action sports cameras. So uh, it might be a game set match for them, or it might just we might find out this isn't as good. We'll see. I know DJI has a perhaps an Action 3 camera coming out soon. So it'd be interesting to do a bake off of which one works best. And I can guarantee you I will get at least the Pro model iPhone and be testing the stabilization. See how it affects the 3D reconstruction. Do you have does it warp the image, you think, or is it just cropping the image, do you suspect?
It's hard to say. Different image stabilization algorithms work in different ways. Yeah, so the naive way would just be to crop it. But then one of the effects, though, that you get a lot of times with video is rolling shutter artifacts. And so
Hmm.
that's just because the sensor, it can't physically read out all of the pixels at the same time. And so it reads them really quickly, row by row. But what that means is if that camera is moving, your top row of pixels was taken at a different point in space than the bottom row because the camera took a longer amount of time to get to those bottom pixels than the top. And so you sort of get this, slanted effect, where if the camera's moving quickly, things can be slanted. And so a lot of image stabilization algorithms will try to correct for that. So it might try to figure out, well, hey, how quickly is the phone moving, in which direction, and can use that then to sort of artificially, untilt the photo to make those straight lines straight again as
Hmm.
opposed to being sideways. So it's very possible that Apple here is doing some of that, both cropping the photo as well as slightly warping it to correct for that rolling shutter.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And again, you need just a lot of computational hardware
Yep.
to pull that off. And I don't know, they didn't talk about, is this a live turn on, live turn off? Is this a post process? It has to process for a few seconds. Whatever it is, I'm sure it's not like minutes of waiting. Um,
No, and there's pros and cons to it too. That'll be interesting to play with it once it comes out, because like if you try to do it, in real time as much as possible, there are some shortcomings there. Because like
mhm.
if you allow yourself some delay in that process and say, okay, well, I'm not going to try to stabilize, the video footage, until I've, gotten at least a second into it. Because what you can do is that you can generate better, smoother curves, a smoother path through
Yeah.
that video footage, when you have all of it available, or at least some buffer. So what Apple could do is maybe you turn on that action, mode, and then the video that you see is delayed by several frames. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see. See what
It
it
could
does.
be just short enough you don't even notice it when
Yeah,
you're filming, but enough for them to get away with it.
yeah,
Um, all right, and then so less with computer vision, but just they had added a whole entire safety with GPS again. I think this is pretty cool.
it was impressive.
Yeah, what they were able to do. I like the key prompts. I don't think I got a photo of that, but instead of having to type out like I'm in trouble, there's a bunch of prompts it runs you through, because who knows, you could be pinned down, or I don't know, not have much brain power left to be able to type things out.
Yeah. But
But yeah,
communicating with a satellite from such a small device, that's just, yeah. I
yeah,
don't, again, I'm not a hardware guy, but that's impressive to think about, a phone, in
yeah,
your pocket communicating with a satellite, way
yeah.
up there. It's so cool.
And not spend like, satellite phones have been around for a long time, but
Yep.
very, very,
Yep.
very, very expensive.
Yeah.
And so $800, $899 for the larger one starting. I must say this is starting, because you can get a bigger storage space. I always recommend at least going up one tier of storage space, unless you just don't really take pictures, but this crew probably will that are listening in. I know you can always put things on the cloud as well, but I always tend to find that like I'm taking video, things like that. This video is becoming 4K, 30 frames or fast, higher. You put a lot of storage on. You need to store a lot of files on your computer or on your phone for a while before you get uploaded. So yeah, so that's the iPhone 14. We got a uh, larger version as well for people who want that bigger screen, which I personally don't like. It's too big of a phone to hold. So
Yeah.
be what that is. So okay, so let's get to the phone. Oh, go ahead. You're gonna say
I was gonna
something?
say, one other thing I just remembered, you showed up that slide though. I was just thinking about, yeah, with the iPhone 14, one of the things they did just casually mention in there was just, oh, they said improved thermal performance. Now, again, I don't know what that means. Was that a 2% in performance, increase, or 10%? But I'm excited, anytime, if Apple improves the thermal performance of the device, so meaning that, hey, it's that the phone isn't going to overheat as quickly. That's a huge benefit, because a lot of times if I'm out there using, my iPhone or any phone, trying to both, capture, video as well as do some on-device processing, and I'm outside and the sun's shining, that phone can quickly overheat, and then my processing starts getting throttled. And so I saw that a lot of times with ARKit. If I'm trying to capture an ARKit session and do some AR processing, by default, that ARKit session is going to try to run at 60 frames per second. But then as that phone overheats, that 60 frame per second ARKit session then jumps down to 30 frames per second, then down to 20. And so it gets this throttled performance as the phone's overheating. So seeing that
Yeah,
improvement there was exciting.
yeah, definitely. And as we've learned, as that throttling can really reduce even the user experience,
Yeah.
because your phone will feel laggy. Um, so you're like, oh, is it capturing enough frames? Just people like responsive.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
all right. So here was the main event for at least me and you, was
Yeah.
the 14 Pro lineup. They added what did they call this guy?
Oh, that's
Uh,
something island.
Dynamic
There you
Island.
go.
So I would have loved to have been on the naming of that little feature here, and it's like a moving little black island where they hide the sensors really well. Um, I'm just wondering if someone was watching like an old SNL skit of the Lonely Island songs and thought, oh, we should call it Dynamic Island. I don't know. But yeah, here it is in several different ways. I thought it was very interesting. They had the Astros, or not Astros, the Athletics in their little sports thing, and not the Giants. Being a Giants fan, lifelong, but that's the team they chose from the Bay Area. Smooth move. But that wasn't as important to us. I do think it will be interesting for app developers who have to figure out how to best utilize that that space. Um, so what I was excited about was 2000 nits peak outdoor brightness.
Yep.
Brighter the better. Um, I would love this on every device because I've been out in the bright sun and you're just squinting or holding got to hold your hand up over your phone just to try to see it. So that's a hard one to show off online, like which one's brighter, but I'll give it an attempt. But I'm excited about that. So again, your pictures outside, that could be very helpful. And an always on display. That's a feature I never knew I would need, but maybe I'll love it. I don't know. I don't know. But on my watch, I do like the always on display. So
Yeah.
again, I don't know. I didn't know I needed it until I had it, or I didn't know I would find it very useful. And then interesting, 16 billion transistors. That's a number I have no idea what that means, except for just faster. Just as I said, incredibly, you can fit 16 billion of anything in your pocket.
Yeah.
So and then 4 nanometer, which I'm pretty sure the analyst on this live stream, if he's still here, would know exactly what that means. Usually it means, again, better thermal performance because it's not as hot. It's also like just less distance to move bits of data.
There's electrons, on the chip, so you can get, reduced power consumption, or faster performance because your chip then is smaller and you have, smaller distance to go.
Yeah. So you're seeing the performance again, no scale, but here we are, of CPU performance. Just helps power all the computational things it's doing. They didn't show off any like games or anything. In the past, they'd show like an AR game or something, but it's kind of like that. And have we reached peak games? But again, there's all these little parts. You have 2 performance cores, 4 high efficiency cores. So those are for, like the nice thing about the efficiency cores, you're able to get much more time on your phone.
Yep.
Because it doesn't need as much power. Fastest mobile CPU, 20% lower power. Again, just means longer, or maybe not longer battery life, but you can do more with the same battery life. And then here you go. Here's the main event. So a 48 megapixel main camera. That's what I was hoping for, and I got it. That and a better LiDAR. But guess what? The LiDAR, they didn't mention it, so we can only assume it's the exact same LiDAR. We will see. I will get the phone. I'm sure Jared will be getting the phone as well. We'll just send him one and he can take a look. But yeah. So what's a quad pixel sensor mean to you?
Yeah. So the quad pixel sensor, it's describing the way that the pixels on that sensor are arranged. So typically in a camera sensor, so if I've got a 12 megapixel camera, what that means is I've got a sensor that has 12 million pixels on it, and so each of those pixels will contribute a piece of information to that final image. And so what Apple's saying here is, we've got this 4x improvement in resolution. So we're going from a 12 megapixel sensor to a 48 megapixel sensor, but by making it a quad pixel sensor, they're saying there's a way that 4 neighboring pixels, so a 2 by 2 grid of pixels, can all contribute to the same pixel value. So trying to sum up 4 little pixels as if there were one big pixel. And so they're using that to give them some flexibility, saying, this can act like a 48 megapixel camera where each pixel is giving some information independently, or we can take a 2 by 2 grid of neighboring pixels, sum them all together, get that quad pixel, get a single value, and have this sensor act like it was just a single 12 megapixel camera.
Okay. And we're seeing this technique used in a lot of cameras coming out today. Even my DJI Mini 3 Pro has a 48 megapixel quad pixel sensor. I see it on the smartphones. I mean, some of these smartphones are they're like 100, 200 megapixels. Yes. And that's a lot. Really, you're not getting a 200 or a 40, you're not these giant megapixel images. You're really getting a smaller one, but has 48 pixels to get computationally perhaps a better 12 megapixel output, or um, doing the averaging of pixels.
Yep.
Uh, will that improve motion blur, perhaps things like that when I'm trying to take sharp images for photogrammetry?
It may not improve motion blur, because with motion blur there, if the camera's moving, you're still going to have that just blur across the pixels. But where these extra pixels can help, is especially like if you're in bright environments. So you've got plenty of light coming in. You can then say, hey, each individual pixel, all 48 pixels, could be used to capture that light and give you information about that. So you could have that. Apple talked about it like their Pro Raw format that gives you all 48 pixels. And so if you have sufficient light, you could get a higher resolution, a more clear, more crisp photo.
Yeah.
There's more detail there. That can also then be used for your own post-processing, or I'm sure it's got to help Apple's, we talked about all the AI enhanced image processing, having that extra sensor data, having those extra pixels will help there.
Yeah. I also noticed it says it's a larger quad pixel size, but that's the size of all 4 pixels, not
all 4
or perhaps the 2x2, like 2 across, or whatever it is. Yeah. So that size is bigger. Says Jared, it's hard to hear you. Maybe your mic's turned down.
I can turn myself up a little bit.
Oh yeah, you sound louder.
Okay. Well,
let us know if it's better.
Yeah.
I'll have to fix you in post then. All right. So then and then it says 24 millimeter focal length again. If you know anything about cameras, we all know what that means. Focal length.
So that's just, your field of view, because that's sort of controlling, how wide of a view that camera has. Which 24 millimeters, it's pretty similar. I think the previous one was 26 or 28 or something in those range. So in your 20s is sort of a nice, sort of wide, 60-degree horizontal field of view, sort of, image.
Yeah. Okay. And then 7-element lens, they say, again, that's like isn't that like that's all like how many layers of glass, things like that in there. So just everyone, I would just say that all just means 100% focus pixels. All those things are things that you probably don't even need to know about, except for they just mean better images, better data for computational photography. Second generation sensor shift OIS. Again, that's just that's just branding. So just means they improved it.
That means they improved it, which again, we don't know how much it's been improved, going from first into second gen, or what kinds of improvement that means. But at least this means, to me, it signals that, hey, Apple is continuing to at least make some sort of advancements, in that image processing or in that sensor technology, which is cool.
And you're seeing these photos I'm put on my screen that they showcased a couple of them that are not easy photos to capture. With just old cameras, you could say an old iPhone probably couldn't capture these nearly as well. But they give you some things like the ISO, the F number, which are all pretty low. Like you don't want a high ISO. Well, the F number is all about how much you want in focus, but you can tell that they're getting good photos off of these. 64 ISO, so you're gonna have a very low noise image.
Yeah, usually the lower that number, the less noise there is in your photo. And again, that's a sort of signal amplification. Just kind of a relative indicator of how much has that photon count been multiplied.
And if anyone's into nerfs, which I think maybe a couple of my followers are, I do know, just based off of what I've learned from the researchers sharing their notes, that you want as less sensor noise as possible, least amount of sensor noise as possible. And I'm sure that works. That's for photogrammetry. That's for anytime you want clear images. That noise is just fake noise. It's fake data. It's fake data in there that can cause issues for getting a clean reconstruction of a scene in 3D. So, and again, here, Pro Raw at 48. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say lower noise is always better. And also going back to that. Like that raw data, though, that's we were talking before about their whatever it was, Photonic engine or something. just reminded me, you can mention nerfs, with raw nerf, one of the recent papers at CVPR this year, talking about, well, hey, as opposed to doing, the training the nerf on these already processed, images, that have already been JPEG compressed or whatever, but going back to that raw data using the bear pattern, so like the individual green, red, blue values from that sensor, and feeding that into the nerf training. There's benefits there again. So having end-to-end control over that input light, that input sensor data, and then the final output. You're able to sort of learn that entire mapping.
Yeah, that makes sense. So better camera, less noise, better clarity, more details.
Yep. Yep.
I mean, how much better? We'll have to have one to see.
We'll have to want them to see. Yeah, we'll have to see. And to note, because Apple didn't say this explicitly, but at least in the diagrams they were showing in their presentation and the way they're describing this quad pixel sensor, that 48 megapixels, what that signals to me, is this is not going to be as good as a normal 48 megapixel camera. So if you went and got a nice high-end DSLR that has 48 megapixels, the arrangement of pixels on that DSLR sensor is going to be different than what Apple's using here. So because they're using this quad pixel design where they're saying, hey, I can have 4 pixels act as one, what's happening is each of those pixels are only picking up a certain kind of light. So when, on your sensor, you have pixels, and each pixel can only, at least the way we've designed them currently, is each pixel will pick up either green, red, or blue light. And so what you do is you just sort of alternate those colors across the sensor. And so you'll have like 2 green pixels and 1 red and 1 blue, and that will sort of make up this little 2x2 pattern that then you repeat over the entire sensor. But it looks like what Apple's done here, as well as other camera manufacturers have done this too, is we'll have 4 green pixels next to each other, then 4 blue, 4 red, and then another 4 green. And so you have just sort of this duplication of sensors right next to each other. And so while that gives you, yes, it gives you a 48 million pixels on your sensor, you're not able to distinguish like, oh, here I have 2 green pixels, 2 green sensors right next to each other. I can't actually distinguish, oh, is it green and then red? But it's like all I can sense is green. And so the amount of color, like amount of detail you'll be able to see in terms of color difference, won't really change, because I don't have a greater variety of color sensors on there or a greater density of different color sensors. But your, sort of illumination change, like the relative intensity, you'd be able to pick up with those different things. So you do get increased quality over just a plain 12 megapixel sensor, because you do have some extra detail in there, but it's not as good as an actual like real 48 megapixel camera, where each pixel is its, alternating pattern. So it's somewhere in between. So there's benefits, but I see it's just a way to provide greater flexibility in the generation of that photo, because there is more data there.
Okay, that makes sense. So if you go spend $5,000 on the latest Canon, Sony, Nikon, mirrorless camera with 48 megapixels on there, it's always going to be superior. They also just have a larger sensor.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, you have a larger sensor, you have a bigger lens. There's a lot of different ways that image is going to be, better or different. But at least in terms in the sensor design, thinking about, as I mentioned, like the bear pattern, the way that they arrange that red, green, and blue sensor elements on the sensor itself. There's pros and cons for the ways you can do that.
And I do know there's diminishing returns. So just chasing better and better cameras won't yield necessarily equivalent results and better output. So say match the camera to the job that you need you're doing. So don't spend $5,000 plus a lens on a high end camera if you're just doing this as a hobby, unless you just have that money to want to spend. So and then so the ultra wide camera, again, that also got improved, it looks like. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but they did have a really cool picture of this katydid, as they called it. It looked like grasshopper. But I do love the macro photography. Jared, you don't use an iPhone from day to day. The one thing that drives me absolutely nuts is that your phone will decide when to switch into macro mode. And a lot of times it's not when you expect it to. And so It is kind of maddening. You can now you can tell to turn it off, but
Hmm.
it is just sometimes it's like when the one thing they got off on the camera feels like to me is when they turn the macro mode on by itself. Um, so just kind of like the wrap up. I think they improved the front facing camera on the both models as well, or perhaps
Yeah.
the 14. That's something I don't really use much except for FaceTiming and
Hmm.
um, but yeah. So peak outdoor it's interesting to these nits. It's peak HDR brightness and peak outdoor brightness for the screen. So that was good. Someone asked, um, Ryan, you asked, is the LiDAR sensor the same as the previous generation? We can only assume because they didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
And they tend to talk about what they improve around the camera cluster there. So let's just assume they did. And they did add crash detection. And so it looks like they improved the, the accelerometer on this and all those little sensors. I'll be excited if that makes a difference for ARKit.
Hmm. Hmm.
Although we all know that ARKit tracking of scenes is already really good. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah. And I think this is interesting. Pro camera with 4 zoom options. So right now I have 0.5, 1, and 3 on my iPhone 13 Pro. So I'll actually have the 2. And then they were also talking about that, like with the raw imagery, you're able to get like 12 megapixel images out of a 48 megapixel shot and kind of like zoom in on things. So I think there's some flexibility there. So we'll see how that. I mean, I don't know if it's something I'll really use, but maybe a photographer would or a filmmaker. Um, so
Yeah, it just makes it easier to compose your shot. I know a lot of times if I'm taking photos, it's nice to sort of already see, okay, I can always crop and post, but sometimes it's nice to frame the shot. Like if I know I want to already crop it in, having that cropping pre-applied, then you can just compose your shot. But yeah, it's just,
yeah.
as I said, like that's one of the nice things with that 48 megapixel sensors. It gives Apple that flexibility. So they can, crop that 48 megapixel sensor to give you that
Hmm.
2x mode. I mean, yes, you're using a reduced number of pixels, but it can help you frame that shot and
Yeah.
enables that feature without having to overly reduce the quality of your image.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that pretty much wraps up everything I saw. I was excited to see. Is there anything you wanted to add? I guess I'd ask you, would you get black? Which color are we going to order and send you? A
I think
black
always just
one,
get black.
silver,
Yeah.
gold. I always, I've gone with black. I think what do I have this year? Oh yeah, black. And I went with the Pacific blue when that came out, just because I thought I'd try something different, and then wish I had black again. Um, and then so yeah, I will be getting for sure this camera phone, this smartphone, and putting it through its paces. And we will get one for Jared, I'm sure, because he needs to be able to make sure it'll work for our EveryPoint API, but which we have no doubts, but still good to have calibrations on that and use it for testing. But yeah, thanks for joining in on this. Um, thanks for everyone who added some comments or questions. I know these phones they're like at this point they're just chasing already what's pretty close to perfection when it comes to cameras. I mean, early on it was like huge jumps in
Hmm.
megapixels and clarity, but now it's just like who's got a better AI. um, and then it's which style of AI do you like better? But um, I'll be excited to see if there's any AR kit improvements. Also, we have Air iOS 16 coming out on these, so um, that a whole slew of AR kit improvements as well that we talked about in our very first episode. Um, says, "Oh yeah, I can't." So when I said I can't wait to get one for photogrammetry, um, yeah, that will be interesting. I've had every iPhone. Well, this year I had every iPhone from the 6S up, and they were all great for photogrammetry. So to think that you
Yep.
need this one, it's not going to make a huge difference. But if you're trying to like perhaps get that edge, you want to get better textures on a 3D model, this might be very intriguing. Also, again, the stabilization. I That's what I'm really excited about. Will I be
Yeah.
able to get a cleaner video output? Because Jared and I like to do photogrammetry from video because it's fast. And if you have 3 little kids running around with you, you only have 5 seconds to get that scan of a statue using video. So
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot. And again, We're going to post this show. You can always watch it after the fact on YouTube on the EveryPoint channel. It's automatically be on here. I'll add some chapter notes so you can jump into sections you might like to watch. But if you already listened to it on a podcast, then again, you can jump on it and watch the video version and see what we were talking about. I'm also going to make sure that this is on podcasts on all major podcasts by tomorrow morning. So thanks everyone for joining. Thanks Jared for jumping on, and excited. This is our first live show. We'll have to do more of these live as well, because I always like people's comments and hear what they have to say. I guess we have one more question before I turn this off. Hoping image stacking result in better stills for textures. I guess it's not a question, it's a hoping. But yeah, we kind of talked about that. Well, Jared talked about that. Image stacking for sure. How they're doing the image stacking. But again, I think we'll be splitting hairs on improvements for most people's results, because as we talked about computer vision in the wild, yeah, it might look better in certain situations, but there's a lot, they're showing these beautiful photos on the keynote, and that's because they had perfect lighting, they had it on a gimbal, they had all these different things. Most people are just holding the camera, taking photos, and it will improve it, but you might not see the improvements you see on these examples unless you're going to those extremes, super bright lights, things like that. But they have made them pretty user proof though, to get fairly decent photos just standing there and taking an image in any daylight situation.
Yep.
So. Yep. All right.
But yeah, it is exciting just thinking about. I mean, we started out talking about the importance of AI, and all of the software-based processing that goes into this. But it's the hardware that sort of lays the foundation. The better hardware, will give, like you said, like with that stabilization. If your video is blurry due to motion blur, there's this, yes, I could say, oh, there's certain software that could try to remove, but it gets to a point where it's like, well, no amount of software is going to be able to recover that blurry video. So having that, having that hardware to provide the foundation, gives you that then. Gives you that space on which then, okay, now that I've got the data in, now it's up to the software to do the rest. And so like you just mentioned, Jonathan, yeah, like hand in hand with this hardware release was iOS 16, so we're coming out with it as well, and so through software, then we might even see improvements to these things. We don't know yet, well, how is ARKit going to perform? Is ARKit performance going to be better? We'll have to wait and see, because that's all going to be software, which maybe that's going to leverage, some better stabilization, in the camera, or leverage some of the different, characteristics of the new sensors, things like that. And so, yeah, it's just going to be, it goes hand in hand. The hardware lays that foundation, but then the software can always improve and build on top of it. And as you said, a lot of it can be subjective about what's the quality of the image, or, what sort of, what are you optimizing for in that final result? Is it sharpness? Is it clarity? Is it dynamic range? All of those things. But yeah, it's a great package.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. Again, you're on YouTube, leave a comment. Anything you liked in here, share it. If you're on podcasts, share the podcast, subscribe. Definitely helps us know that we're on the right track, because your guys' feedback is helpful for us to know what people like to hear about. And we'll see you in the next episode, probably the next week or two. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Jared.
Thanks.